In both the political world of government and the criminal underworld, the goal many seek to reach is one of unchallengeable power. There is a giant fence that separates these two worlds. However, there are a few in history who have stood tall enough to straddle the fence. These men are the Mobster Politicos. Mobster Politicos, Volume 1. Buffalo Crime Family Consigliere, Giovanni, John, Montana. Giovanni Montana was born in Montedoro, Sicily on July 1st, 1893. Montedoro was a mining community supported by several sulfur mines, which employed many of the young men in the area. The instability of the sulfur market in 1896 drove many in the area to immigrate to the United States of America, principally to the coal mining area centered around Pittston, Pennsylvania, where mobsters such as Russell Buffalino got their start. Young Giovanni immigrated to the United States at the age of 13 in June 1907, settling further north in Buffalo, New York. There, he quickly began to show his entrepreneurial talents. In grade school, Montana made his first dollars as a messenger and delivery boy for a West Side candy shop. With his brothers Salvatore, Angelo, Peter, and Joseph, the 17-year-old who now went by John Charles Montana would also push a popcorn cart through Buffalo's Little Italy at a time when Italians lived in high-density areas on the Lower West Side and downtown. Because the demand was so great, the Montana brothers had to fold their first business as they could not supply the many people who wanted their goods. By the 1920s, with the start of Prohibition, Montana allegedly became involved in bootlegging. During this time, Stefano Magaddino, a powerful mobster from Castellammare del Golfo, was forming the Buffalo crime family. Montana would join this powerful organization and rise quickly, becoming a power in his own right. Years down the road, Montana's nephew Charles would marry the oldest daughter of Buffalo boss Stefano Magaddino. Magaddino's only son Peter also married Montana's niece. Through family ties, John Montana merged with the most ruthless criminal leader the city of Buffalo had ever seen. Montana was a smart businessman, though. He never fit the description of what a mafioso was supposed to be. In 1922, John Montana formed the Buffalo Taxi Company. A few years later, he bought and merged with the Yellow Cab Company in an effort to consolidate cars and call centers, as well as eliminate the taxi competition. Through political backing among leading Italians, as well as other prominent Buffalonians, Montana was given the Republican nod to run for the city's Common Council. He would be elected as a representative from the Niagara District in 1927, giving the Buffalo mob their first foothold in local politics. He would be re-elected in 1929 while continuing to strengthen his ties to the Buffalo elite. For 4 years, Montana served the city of Buffalo on the council and saw major advances in a city already booming. Once on the council, John Montana was made the chairman of the Housing and Slum Clearance Committee. This gave him and his Mafia associates a direct influence over where people lived and what reconstruction efforts would be made by the city. He also served as the chairman of the Labor Relations and Compensation Committee. This empowered the Buffalo crime family and many of the area's union locals. During his time in office, he was applauded for his civic achievements and received awards and accolades for his public service. While his role in the Mafia was never made public during his time in office, John Montana did indeed live a double life as both consigliere of the Buffalo crime family, as well as a councilman and a trusted advisor to Mayor Frank X. Schwab. With Schwab, who was a former brewer and bootlegger himself, Montana fought for and created the first public bus system in Buffalo, when most leading businessmen in the transportation industry were opposed to the idea of public busing. Montana would then create the Montana Company, which he would use to secure a sweetheart contract, furnishing the first ever buses in Buffalo with seats, cushions, and everything else needed on board. Also, while a city councilman, Montana saw the opening of the Buffalo Airport in Cheektowaga. He was instrumental in overseeing the 2-year-long construction of the New York Central Station, as well as the Peace Bridge, Buffalo's international gateway to Canada. He would also pass legislation to build a new City Hall building in downtown Buffalo as well, seemingly cementing his political legacy. Montana oversaw the terrific growth of Buffalo during his tenure as a political leader. Montana also made sure that his hidden partnerships never came to light, while still placing people in positions to reap the benefits of the construction and transportation boom, including himself. An example of this is when the Buffalo Taxi Company was given a sweetheart contract to be the sole cab proprietor at the new Central Terminal Station, where 200 trains a day were said to go through Buffalo. Montana's Buffalo Taxi Company taxis were the only ones allowed to pick up passengers that wanted a ride. Buffalo police even ticketed and towed other cab companies that sought fares from the train station. During a successful re-election season for Montana, the councilman was involved in a major business deal that left him as the most powerful taxi tycoon in the area. In late June 1929, Montana, who had previously acquired the Yellow Taxi Cab Company, convinced Fred Van Dyke to give up his business, the largest cab competitors in western New York. 8 years before, Fred Van Dyke had bought the Charles W. Miller Transportation Company of Buffalo. It had been a family-owned business for 2 generations. It was Buffalo's first permanent transportation company, and now it belonged to Montana. Montana merged his cabs with Van Dyke's, pulling together more than 200 cars with 60-plus call stations. While Montana already owned a franchise at the Central Terminal, he was in a good position to grow more powerful in an increasingly mobile city. As a business-savvy communicator, John Montana informed city riders that while he now owned the second-largest cab company in the state, he would keep fares the same as they were with the Yellow Cab Company, 50 cents for the first mile and 10 cents for the next 3 miles. Montana's cabs were also known to transport gambling paraphernalia and liquor during this time. However, the behind-the-scenes role he played as Buffalo family consigliere was never discovered. In the late 20s and early 30s, just as many business leaders were doing, the most dominant Mafia figures were eliminating rivals and consolidating power. By forming large entities with several different levels and locales, the Mafia built itself into a national organization that expanded through the nation's Italian neighborhoods. As the right-hand man of local Mafia kingpin and National Commission member Stefano Magaddino, Montana witnessed many changes in the underworld of organized crime. After years of street warfare with the rival Neapolitan Camorra, the Sicilian Mafia became the dominant force in gambling, labor, and bootleg liquor in New York City, and by proxy, across the nation. By the 1930s, 2 major factions were left standing. The Masseria faction, led by Giuseppe, Joe the Boss Masseria, and the Calamaresi faction, led by Salvatore Maranzano. Stefano Magaddino from Niagara Falls was a senior member of the Calamaresi faction. War would ensue between these rivals, and after losses on both sides, Masseria underboss Charles Lucky Luciano would betray his boss, allowing for his assassination. Salvatore Maranzano and Charlie Lucky Luciano were the winners of the Mafia feud and called the heads of the families from across the nation to meet and discuss the reorganization of the La Cosa Nostra in America. Families from diverse locations gathered in Chicago to hash out the Mafia leadership vacuum now that Joe the Boss Masseria was dead and the Calamaresi War was over. The group would begin to institute a national ruling body for organized crime in the nation that would change the face of La Cosa Nostra forever. In May 1931, Stefano Magaddino planned on attending this important Mafia summit with his brother Antonio and cousin Peter. Because of his active role in the Calamaresi faction of La Cosa Nostra, Magaddino was in an important position among national crime bosses. He also instructed his close friend and family consigliere, John Montana, to attend. In the biography of Joe Bonanno, the former Brooklyn Mafia boss talks of John Montana's trip to the Chicago Conference. Bonanno, who was Stefano Magaddino's younger cousin, went to the national summit by train from New York with a contingent of men including Lucky Luciano and Salvatore Maranzano. The train stopped at Central Terminal on the east side to pick up Buffalo's Mafia leaders. According to Bonanno, we all boarded the same train for Chicago. In Buffalo, Stefano Magaddino and his right-hand man John Montana and Pete Magaddino, my cousin, all got on the train. Maranzano got off the train to make a phone call. A half hour passed. Maranzano didn't return. The train was scheduled to leave the station momentarily, and it was unthinkable to abandon Maranzano. Montana got off the train. Montana was an illustrious man in Buffalo. He owned the cab company, and at one time, he was the city's deputy mayor. When he returned to our compartment, Montana told us he had arranged for the train to wait until Maranzano came back. This exhibition of clout impressed us greatly. After Maranzano boarded again and we were on our way, my cousin Stefano beamed with pride. "See what kind of men I have under me," Stefano said. "John can stop trains." Not long after the Chicago meeting, Maranzano would be killed as well, ushering in the commission's formation as it is known today. The first official commission would be chaired by Luciano and count both Bonanno and Magaddino as members. While his high-level role within the Mafia wasn't publicly known, his stature among Buffalo's Italians was obvious. When 300 Italian Americans representing 45 Italian organizations came to the glamorous Stadler Hotel in downtown Buffalo to celebrate Columbus Day in 1930, Councilman Montana was one of the honored guests. As noted by the local newspaper, Mayor Edward H. Butler, the police commissioner, the general manager of the Chamber of Commerce, the state assemblyman, and many other politically powerful Italians also attended. When Prohibition was repealed on December 5, 1933, Montana moved in and legally purchased breweries to supply the now legal alcohol industry. Using his Mafia distribution connections in the German, Italian, Polish, Irish, and African American neighborhoods within the region, Montana was able to use the old Prohibition infrastructure to dominate the legal booze trade from the jump. In 1933, John Montana created the Empire State Brewery Corporation and the Power City Distribution Company with his longtime business partners, Stefano and Antonio Magaddino. Through Empire State Brewing Corporation and Power City Distributing, Montana and Magaddino remain the absolute controllers of the alcohol industry in upstate New York. From creation to distribution and finally to retail, Montana and Magaddino made money every step of the way. Riding this wave of success, Montana would even run for U.S. Congress in 1938. However, he would lose in the primary. Despite the loss, John Montana's national stature in the Mafia complemented his national reputation among Republican Party leaders. Montana's business success would bring tremendous legitimate revenue and resources into the Mafia's sphere of influence, and he would also provide secure outlets to launder the Mafia's illegitimate profits. Many of Montana's business opportunities came because of his influential position with the local government in Buffalo. In 1943, he served as chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals in the city. Whenever there was a zoning dispute, Montana's decision would carry a lot of weight. This benefited the Buffalo crime family tremendously. His friends in city government would help him out again when in August 1944, independent taxicab owners organized and approached Mayor Joseph J. Kelly for help against the monopolizing Montana taxis. The Independent Taxicab Association of Buffalo, New York claimed that Montana was given unfair contracts which violated monopoly laws of the day. Montana's companies operated exclusively at a number of public spaces across the city. For example, Van Dyke Taxi and Transfer were the only companies allowed to move travelers from Buffalo Central Terminal on the east side. Montana's companies were able to purchase gas when World War II rationing was forcing other companies out of business. The president of the Independent Cab Association, Thomas Caverly, created a publicity battle against Montana through the local newspapers. He was quoted as saying, "I fail to see why the city of Buffalo should be paying the salaries of its police department to assist the Buffalo Central Terminal and to protect their contract with Van Dyke Taxi and Transfer Company." Despite these issues, Montana's business continued to thrive throughout the 1940s and into the 1950s, due both to his political and underworld influence. His position as consigliere of the Buffalo crime family and his familial ties with the Magadinos ensured his position. His political contacts were unlimited as well. Besides important roles within the community, Montana was alleged to be a powerful organizer with the Fort Erie racetrack in Ontario, where horse betting and gambling-related loans had become an important operation for Mafia earners. Opened in 1897, the Fort Erie racetrack was taken over by the Fort Erie Jockey Club in 1920. John Montana eventually became the most powerful mobster associated with the racetrack. For a time, Montana was even director of the Fort Erie Jockey Club. In the summer of 1956, Montana was even named Buffalo's Man of the Year by the Erie Club. The Erie Club was an association of Buffalo police officers led by Charles M. Basil, who said the award was for outstanding civic achievement. The prominent Buffalonians on the selection committee even included the district attorney at the time, John F. Dwyer. In the underworld, however, treachery and power grabs were beginning to occur. Montana's boss, Stefano Magadino, who was at the time chairman of the Mafia's ruling commission, had been having health problems. Meanwhile, Vito Genovese wanted to call a national meeting to affirm himself as the new boss of what was the Luciano crime family. Genovese, who was Frank Costello's underboss, attempted to have him killed. Costello decided to retire rather than go to war, and it was up to the commission to affirm him as boss, along with affirming the new boss of the former Anastasia family and a host of other issues. Genovese lobbied to have the meeting in Chicago, hosted by ally Sam Giancana. However, Stefano Magadino didn't want a kowtow to his New York rival Genovese, and lobbied for the meeting to be held in upstate New York on a ranch owned by former Buffalo mobster and current boss of the northeastern Pennsylvania family, Joe Barbara. A resourceful local state trooper named Edgar D. Croswell had been aware that the Bonanno family underboss Carmine Galante had been stopped by state troopers following a visit to Barbara's estate the previous year. A check of Galante by the troopers found that he was driving without a license and that he had an extensive criminal record in New York City. In the time preceding the November 1957 meeting, Trooper Croswell had Barbara's house under occasional surveillance. He had become aware that Barbara's son was reserving rooms in local hotels, along with procuring the delivery of large quantities of meat from the local butcher to be delivered to the Barbara home. This made Croswell suspicious, so he made the decision to keep an eye on the Barbara home. When Croswell and the state police saw that many luxury cars were parked on the Barbara property, they began taking down license plate numbers. Having found that many of these cars were registered to known criminals, the officers called in reinforcements to the scene and began to set up a roadblock. Having just started their meeting, Bartolo Guccia, a Castellammare del Golfo native and Joe Barbara employee, spotted the roadblock while leaving the Barbara estate. Guccia later said he was returning to the Barbara home to check on a fish order. Some attendees attempted to drive away but were stopped by the roadblock. Others trudged through the fields and woods, ruining their expensive suits before they were caught. Up to 50 men escaped, but over 60 were apprehended, including current and future commission members Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Joseph Profaci, and Joseph Bonanno. Virtually all of them claimed they had heard Joseph Barbara was feeling ill and they wanted to stop by and wish him well. John Montana was one of the men apprehended. Montana was picked up by New York State Police, straddling a barbed wire fence in his nicely attired suit. This would be the first time in his illustrious career that he was ever publicly linked to the Mafia. Because of Apalachen, law enforcement could no longer deny the existence of an organized Mafia syndicate across the nation. Exposed mob bosses were on the front pages across the country, and powerful men like Montana were facing their harshest scrutiny ever. John Montana initially told the news that he had car trouble and stumbled upon a party. Montana explained that he was driving from Buffalo to Pittston, Pennsylvania with his buddy Antonio Magadino, and the brakes on their new Cadillac began to fail near Utica, so they went to their old friend Joe Barbara's house where they could get their car fixed. To their surprise, there was a big party at the Barbara household. John Montana said he didn't inquire about the party or join the festivities at all. Instead, he just sat waiting patiently in a quiet room. When asked why he was found running through the woods, Montana stated that he had heard someone yell "run," so he and Antonio Magadino followed the contingent through the door and into the woods. Due to this public embarrassment, Montana immediately lost much of his political clout as former allies began to distance themselves from the mobster. In order to prove he was a legitimate businessman and not a mafioso, Montana began to distance himself from his La Cosa Nostra counterparts, refusing to meet with other Mafia members. This weakened his standing within the Mafia itself. Within a year, the U.S. Senate began an investigation about Appalachia. They questioned attendees and mob bosses from all over the nation. Observing constitutional rights, every mobster pleaded the Fifth Amendment, refusing to say a word as to not incriminate themselves. Every mobster except John Montana. Out of everyone put before the U.S. senators and asked to testify, Montana was the only one to give an explanation as to why he was there. Car trouble. He was vigorously questioned and embarrassed by the panel. The senators did not like his answers, and Montana was ordered to serve 5 years behind bars and pay a fine of $10,000 for conspiracy to obstruct justice. The other attendees who took the Fifth Amendment during the investigation all received sentences for contempt as well. However, on November 29, 1960, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit decided that none of the attendees really committed a crime by meeting, and they were all freed from jail or bail, including the 66-year-old Montana, who now lived at 340 Staten Avenue in North Buffalo. Judge J. Edward Lombard wrote that, "In America, we still respect the dignity of the individual, and even an unsavory character is not to be imprisoned except on definite proof of a crime." By now, Montana was crippled in both the legitimate world and the underworld. In business and politics, he would be forever tainted by his Mafia affiliation. Montana faced a lot of heat in the underworld also, for offering an explanation during questioning, violating the sacred oath of Omerta. He would live out his remaining years quietly, and on March 18, 1964, John Montana died shortly after being admitted to the Buffalo General Hospital because of a heart attack. John Montana leaves behind a legacy in Buffalo of both positive achievement as well as Mafia corruption. He is a case study on how to use the power of government to benefit an illegal criminal enterprise. He was a true mob politico.